All right, so I'm going to continue on. We've got just a few more slides, and then we'll finalize this this app so that our list or our Esri apps page actually contains a list of Esri apps on it that you can scroll through. So that's the end goal here. So let me open back the PowerPoint. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about is this concept of a model, delegate, and view. And so let me make sure that I have, okay, yeah. This concept is a way to keep your data separate from the view, like the UI view that you're using to display the data. And it's really useful because you might want to, for example, on a mobile phone, you might want to show a list of images, for example, in a list view. But on a tablet, you might want to show it in a grid view. And so by keeping the data separate from the view, you can easily change out the view without changing the data. So I'm hoping that makes a little bit more sense as I go through this PowerPoint and then we do a hands-on exercise. So now the model part of this is what actually stores your data. So a model holds data consisting of a collection of items with the same type of properties. So you can see here on the right, we have defined a list model. That's what the model is a list model. And a list model contains list elements. And within that list element, you define your own properties. So here we have multiple list elements that all contain a property manually defined as image source, which is the source to some picture file, and a title, which is just a string. So that's something that is manually defined, and each list element needs to have the same properties. The delegate is a template that's used what's used to display the data in the model. So it uses a common UI to render each model on a view. So in this case, we have a delegate that would be within a view, but the delegate shows an image, and you can see that the image's source property is set to the image source. Where did image source come from? It came from this model that was defined on the previous slide, right? So we have a list model that contains list elements. Each list element contains an image source and a title. So the image source in the delegate is coming from the model. And nested within the image is a text element. And the text value is title. And that's coming from that list model again. So the title is defined in the list model. So that's the delegate piece. It's how the data is going to be displayed, the template basically for how the data is going to be displayed, the data in the model. And then finally, the view. So the view specifies how the delegate will be displayed. A view displays the layout within which rendered model items are positioned. So in this case, like a view could be a list view, which is what you see on the right-hand side of the screen. That's a list view where you can have a horizontal list view, or in this case, a vertical list view. You can have a grid view, which would show your images and titles in a grid. So there's different ways of displaying the data. So advantages, like I mentioned before, you might have a use property to binding to say if the user is viewing this on a screen that's less than, let's just say 400 pixels, show a list view. And if they're viewing this page on a screen that's greater than 400 pixels, show a grid view. And the model, the data that is driving the view always stays the same. It never changes. And you can also update your view at any time just by changing what data is in your model. So maybe you add new list elements in your model for new images and text in the example that I showed, or you remove them. So just by changing the data that's in the model, you change what is shown in the view. So we're actually going to use a list view with a model and a delegate in our last hands-on exercise. So hopefully that will help, kind of drive home the idea of models, views, and delegates. So for this last hands-on exercise, we're going to go back to the folder that you all unzipped. Shoot, I closed my folder, but let me open it real quick. So inside of the zip folder that you unzipped, there is a text file called listmodel.txt. And I just put this together to save time so that you don't have to manually type out all this information. But what's in this is a list model, and I've defined the list elements. So I've defined properties in each list element for app name and app image. And again, anything inside of the list element is something that is defined by the developer, right? So this isn't like I would, click on the list element help topic and find these property names. No, these are property names that I came up with, that I defined. So what I want you guys to do is copy all the contents that are within this text file. And if you want to make it easier, just click Control A, make sure that will select everything, then make sure that you have it all. Right click and click copy. And then we're going to paste this right inside of our code. So I'm going to just paste it at the top of my app. So right under where the width and height are defined and before the first page is defined, I'm going to paste this code right there. So what I really have here is the name of different Esri apps, and then the URL to the image for that particular app. And if you want to, make sure that all of your text is aligned correctly, you can, like mine's not aligned currently, so I would just click Control A on my keyboard to select everything in my QML file, all the text, and then Control I. And this is on my Windows machine. That's how I would do it. If you're on a Mac, you can go to Edit and Select All, and you'll see the shortcut key. And then
same one, Command A, Command I.
Okay,
Instead
good.
of Control, it's Command.
Okay, good. Okay. So you can see we've got many different list elements, and now we're just hard coding this particular list model, right? But if you were to go to the help for a list model, and if I just put my cursor somewhere in this list model and click F1, I can see the different properties and methods of a list model, and I can dynamically add new elements, using append or remove or, change the order. So you can see that you don't have to hard code all of the elements in a list model like we've done here. Right, this could be something dynamic where, you read the information from some sort of config file and go fetch the data and then append it to a list model. Or maybe you want to allow the user to create a new app and submit an image with a name, then you would append that or insert it. Or maybe you want them to have the ability to remove one of the elements in the model, and so you would just call the remove method and remove whichever element they selected, just as an example. Okay, so now that we have our list model defined, the next thing I want to do is finally update the code so that the information in this list model is displayed in our Esri apps page. So if I go to the bottom of our code where we defined the apps page, just after the header, but still within the page itself. So the best way to do this is right next to the toolbar, if you put your cursor next to the bracket that is the opening bracket for the toolbar, that should highlight the end bracket for your toolbar. And so right after the toolbar bracket, we're going to define a new element or new object called list view. And I want this list view to fill the page. So I'm going to set the fill anchor to the parent. Now, whenever we're using a view like a list view or a grid view, we need to define the model that is used to display the data, the model that contains the data that's going to be displayed by the view. And so we just put that at the top of our page, and the list model ID is list model Esri apps. So I'm going to define the model property for the list view and set it equal to list model Esri apps that we defined at the top. Now we have a spacing property that allows us to specify the number of pixels that will be used as space between the different elements in the model. So I'm going to set that to 20. I want to give 20 pixels between each of the items in the model. Okay, so we've got our view, we've got our model. Now we need to define our delegate. And our delegate, again, is the template that's used to display the data in the model. So I think once we write this and we launch the app, and then you kind of go back and kind of refamiliarize yourself with what we discussed and what we wrote, I think this will make a lot more sense as it kind of starts to sink in. So for our delegate, we're going to set it equal to an image. And we're going to set the source of the image equal to app image. Now, where did app image come from? It came from our model. We have a bunch of list elements defined within our model, and each list element has both an app image property and an app name property that we created. The app image property stores the URL for the image that we're going to display in this list view. So that will be the source of our image. We want to anchor this image so that it's in the parent's horizontal center. So we're going to set anchors.horizontal_center to parent.horizontal center. So we want the center of the image to be the horizontal center of the parent. Now within this image, we're going to define a label. And I'm going to set the text of the label to app name. So just like app image, app name is also coming from our model. And we'll set the font pixel size to 18. And finally, last thing, we'll set some anchors for the label. So we want this label to be anchored to the bottom of the image. And we want the anchor or the label to be in the horizontal center of the image. So we'll leave this up for a second. Okay. So just to recap, we've created a list view. So when we're talking about views, models, delegates, this is the view part. This is how the data will be displayed in a list. It's a vertical list by default, but there's a property that allows you to change it so that you can show a list horizontally. Or if you wanted to use a grid view, you would change to using a grid view, but this is the view part. The model we've defined here, so this is where our data comes from. And then the delegate is the template for how we're going to display that data within the view. And so we're going to display it with an image and a label over top of the image. The image and the label text both come from our model. So I saved that. I'm going to go ahead and run it. And now when I go to the menu and I click Esri Apps, you can see I have an image and the name, and it's the information that's coming directly from my model. You can see that there's 20 pixels of spacing between each item in the list view. It's because I set the spacing property to 20 pixels. Both my image and my label are horizontally centered within the app. It's because I set those anchors. And that's all. Does anybody have any questions or need to go back and see any of the code?
Mine came out with just a text list instead of the nice colored boxes, but I'll figure out why.
You said it came in how?
It's just the centered text without the nice colored boxes. It's like,
oh, okay, maybe you might be missing the image source, possibly. Yeah, so for the delegate, you want to define it as an image and then set the source of the image to app image.
Brooke.
Yep, Michael.
How do we, make use of this demo as, so it's a dummy demo.
Yeah.
So do we connect this to URLs, or what's a good to make it functional, this demo?
Oh, I see. So are you kind of saying like if you wanted to be able to click on these and view the image, like and view the information?
I muted that. There was a lot of background noise.
I think the question is just, what can we make these actually do something? I guess one idea would be, if you clicked on one of these, make it actually open that.
Yeah, that's a really
URL of some sort.
Yeah. So and maybe we could just, I could show a really quick sample. I have the URLs to the images. So what I'll do is just when you click on one of these, it'll open up the URL image in a browser. But what you could do is have another property, right? Like maybe app URL, and have the URL to where you can read more information about this particular app. I don't have that in this list model, so I'm going to work with what I have. If I wanted to give the ability for a user to click on this image and then view more information, what I would do is, an image doesn't have that clicked signal like our buttons do, right? So, but there is a component called mouse area. And so within my image, just after my label, I'm going to define a mouse area. And I'm going to have it fill the parent. So it's going to fill the entire image. And this mouse area gives us the on-clicked ability. And even though it's mouse area, it still works on mobile devices too. It's just what it's called, mouse area. And so now when the image is clicked, I might say, okay, open up, let's see, open. There's a JavaScript function that we can access from Qt called qt.openURL externally. And that opens a URL in the default browser. And so since the app image in my model is actually a URL, I can use that here. But ideally, I would have another property defined in my model for, like I said, like a URL to the actual product page. I don't have that, so I'm just going to use this. So now when I run this app and I click on the item, the image, it takes me to the actual URL of that image in the browser. I hope that makes sense.
That's a great example.
Thank you.
Sure. So I'll show that code.
I have a question also.
Yes, sure.
What if we don't have the JPEG files in from, you get somewhere in your, servers, so JPEGs. What if we don't have it in the server? Can we add the internally? Maybe you understand me. I can't.
I think, yeah. So I think what you're saying is if you didn't have these like on the web, but you had them like accessible from your own computer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in that case, you would store them in a folder, in the project folder, and access them the same way that we've been accessing the images, like for the tool buttons. You could do it that way, and then you'd package the images, because they would be in the project file or project folder. When you deployed the app to a mobile device, they would be internal, like within the app on the device. You'd be able to still access those. Just like the images that we're using on the tool button. Is that what your question is?
My question is also, what will be the type for queries?
It would be a string. So in the app name, instead of the URL, you would say image / the name. So the app image, now it's pointing to a URL. So now it would be images / whatever that image name, and then you put that as a source of the image.
Just like this.
Yeah.
Like this. Sorry, I missed the point. Sorry.
Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
No problem.
I close that help window in my Qt Creator page.
Yeah, so when you have a help window open, it's this tiny little button all the way to the right. If you see my screen.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, sure. Okay. Any other questions on this demo?
Can you please go right to the bottom right to take a snapshot of what you did?
Oh yeah, sure. This here? Oh yeah, the mouse area, yeah. Okay. So I just have a couple more slides left here. So some key points, as you've hopefully seen and hopefully you agree, programming in QML is quick and relatively easy. And also, as you've seen throughout the hands-on demo, JavaScript plays an important role in QML programming. So it's all of your application logic. We've seen that QML is really the UI, so the drawer, the item delegates, the toolbars, all that. But what actually happens when you click on those, open the drawer, close the drawer, show the page, all of that is JavaScript. If you use the QML help during development, that's going to help you learn a lot about the different types and their properties. Obviously, for these demos, I just kind of wrote out the properties without explaining or showing where you'd find those in the help because we don't have that kind of time. But if you are using any of these components or any other components, definitely use the QML help to understand what properties you have available and what you can do. As you've seen, we talked about the different ways of positioning elements on the screen. Positioning elements by their X and Y properties isn't typically the best way to do it. You'd only reserve that for when there's no other option that would work. And property binding is a great way to keep properties of your app objects in sync, just like we've seen with, binding the width of the toolbar to the parent or anything that we looked at with property binding. So there are so many different possibilities that are available with QML. And so, QML, I'm sure that this was covered in the workshops last week. QML is not a language that's specific to Esri or AppStudio. QML is a language that's out there that AppStudio just uses. But QML has so many different more types than what we've looked at. There's different types for multimedia, including all the things that you see on the screen. So, using QML in your AppStudio apps, you can take video, you can take audio, you've got accessibility to a media player, camera, and a lot of these types are used in some various apps that we have in the enterprise samples. So if you take a look at the Survey 123 sample, that code is using a lot of the multimedia functionality that is listed here. Same with the Quick Capture app that's also using the camera. So those are some good samples to take a look at that you have access to if you're interested in using some of these QML types. And I have lists of a few other different categories: sensor types, accelerometer, compass, gyroscope, light sensor, tilt sensor. There's so many different capabilities that you could tap into on the device with QML. And finally, sensor readings. So any of the things that you see here, being able to take those readings. And there's actually an exhaustive list of all QML types here at this URL. So if you are interested in making kind of developing an app that uses some sort of unique functionality that requires one of these QML types, definitely take a look at this URL. And that is all I have.